Yeah, I'm Kevin Welch. I'm with EFF-Austin. We are a longstanding Austin-based digital liberties organization. Obviously, we have a long history with Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco, who also has a representative here we'll be hearing from shortly. Vahid asked me if I could speak a little bit about, particularly some of the digital civil liberties issues around having autonomous weapon systems and things like facial recognition, specifically more related to policing concerns. So I wanted to speak, I've given us a nice little provocative title here, but just my brief talk, I'm calling it Artificial Morality, the Risks of Turning Ethical Decision-Making Over to Machines. So let's see if I can advance this. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So in the 21st century, machines are increasingly automating non-routine tasks with moral implications. Notable examples we see of this that, for instance, drones in the Middle East are increasingly deciding who to kill without a human operator intervening to decide if the decision was the right call or not. This is literally already happening in some of the war zones along the Turkish, Syria, and Iraq border. We have facial recognition systems that are deciding who to detain or who to publicly humiliate. And just in general, a movement toward human beings not being the ones involved in the decision-making process, a full trust in the machine learning AI algorithm to get it right. These moves are often justified with this idea that somehow machines are less biased than humans, or maybe even more ethical in some way than humans, that we can get away from all these pesky subjective judgments of human beings if we turn it over to machines. But for those of us who've been in this space and research this and look at these emerging spaces and try to go, well, is there evidence to bear this out? These claims seem to be somewhat suspect, and we have multiple emerging real-world cases that illustrate this. So all AI systems get trained on real-world data, and the flaws in that real-world data get magnified in what the AI starts to believe about the world. So when you train an AI system on existing crime data, it can be tempting to think that it's saying this is where crime happens. That this is this is where crimes will be committed. But the reality is that when you train it on this data, you're actually predicting where policing occurs, which, as we all know, is a biased institution in America, that particularly lower income and communities of color receive heavier policing, even though, as anybody who has ever been to a rich high school party knows, plenty of law breaking happens in rich affluent communities as well. They're just not policed at the same level. So when you train these systems on that data, they're just telling you where policing historically has already happened, giving the illusion of an objectivity about it. The existing racial and economic disparities in arrests and sentencing in our country result in machine learning systems trained on this data becoming biased themselves. They're not biased in the sense that there's not anything emotional about it, but because they have learned how the world works from our world, and our world is filled with flawed, biased humans, we don't actually get a world that is less biased, but it is now hidden behind the guise of technological objectivity, that there is some definitive mathematical statement being made, when it is really just that it has crunched thousands of unique scenarios and said, yep, this is how crime has always worked, therefore it must be objectively true and not part of systemic issues in this country. Ask Delphi, which is a moral AI engine that was trained on real people's common responses to various moral conundrums. It basically tried to teach the AI ethics by creating a bunch of moral questions, asking real people whether they thought this was moral or immoral, and then trying to get the machine to learn what ethics look like from real people's answers. It broadly gets certain things most of us would agree are good or bad, but the truth is we all know real people are racist, sexist, ableist, and classist. So it turns out Ask Delphi is too. Ask Delphi thinks it's better to be rich than poor. Ask Delphi thinks it's better to be straight than LGBTQ. It has learned these things from the real moral, ethical gaps that real human beings have. And it turns out that the most hilarious part is that Ask Delphi believes that any action, even up to genocide, is moral as long as you assure it that it will make everyone happy. Then it gives you the go-ahead, and it's literally like utilitarianism taken to the ultimate extreme. Well, it makes everyone happy. Who am I to say it's immoral? Finally, a point I want to touch on is that giving machines the ability to kill on their own really breaks a lot of our current systems of oversight and accountability. Current AI systems built on machine learning crunching massive data sets, they are incapable of explaining why they make the decisions they do. Like if you ask it, when it gives you an answer and you ask it, well, how did you decide that these two images are of the same person? Or how did you decide this is more likely to predict crime than this? It can't tell you. Even knowing who to sue when an autonomous weapons system makes a mistake and kills an innocent person becomes far more difficult than at least the token accountability we hopefully have with real human beings when they screw up law enforcement operations. And, it definitely can be a bit of a depressing fight, to try to get reform on this anyway. But I encourage anybody listening that there are options, and I encourage you to get involved in this movement, which does exist all across the U.S. to try to bring accountability and reform to this stuff. Not that human decision making is great always on ethics and morality, but this tech isn't any better, and it's certainly not somehow more objective than we are. And it may have its places in our world, but it needs to have oversight and accountability, and humans still need to be involved when there is the question of whether we should take a human life.